What if I told you that the glossy, sharp-suited world of Suits was hiding a truth no one ever wanted you to know? What if I told you that behind the glass towers, the tailored lines, and the polished charm, there were whispers, whispers of flirtation, of intimacy, of blurred lines that crossed from the script into reality? That's exactly what Patrick J. Adams has finally admitted. And the way he tells it, it wasn't just one passing glance, one careless word. It was a pattern that changed everything on set. You see, audiences loved Suits for its clever dialogue, its fast-paced energy, and the magnetic pull between its characters. But how much of that pull was acting? And how much of it was real chemistry spilling out where it shouldn't have? That's the uncomfortable, irresistible question Patrick has now forced us to ask. And make no mistake, his words are shaking the very foundation of how we thought about this iconic show. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think about it. When Suits first aired back in 2011, it wasn't supposed to become the cultural phenomenon it did. It was another slick legal drama, designed to catch attention but not necessarily to dominate the conversation. Yet it did. Why? Because the relationships felt real. Too real. Fans were hooked on the charisma, the charm, the simmering tension between characters. And the biggest question was always the same. Were they just that good at acting, or was something else happening off camera? Patrick J. Adams has now answered that question, or at least cracked the door open enough for us to see inside. And what we see is messy, complicated, and more scandalous than anyone could have imagined. But let's pause for a moment. Why does this matter now? Why, years after Suits wrapped, are Patrick's words so explosive, so urgent? It's simple. Because Meghan Markle, one of the central figures in this story, is no longer just an actress. She's a global icon, a royal figure, someone whose every move is dissected and debated. What happened on the set of Suits isn't just about an old TV drama. It's about understanding the woman who would one day step into the world's most scrutinized family, and about the man brave, or reckless, enough to finally break the silence. So let me ask you, when Patrick said she flirted with everyone, what did you feel? Shock? Curiosity? Maybe even recognition, like a piece of a puzzle you didn't know you were missing had just been handed to you? Because those words don't just suggest casual charm. They suggest something deeper, something deliberate. And when he went further, saying there was intimacy, real intimacy, it shattered the idea that what we saw on screen was just make-believe. The irony is almost too perfect, isn't it? A show about secrets, about bending rules, about living double lives. Mirrored by what was actually happening on set. A cast playing lawyers caught in webs of lies and attraction, while the Real cast lived out their own unspoken dramas behind the scenes. Now, imagine the pressure cooker of that environment. Long days on set, endless rehearsals, emotionally charged scenes, and the constant need to keep up appearances. Add to that Meghan Markle's undeniable charm, her ability to light up a room with a smile, and her knack for forming quick bonds. Then, put Patrick J. Adams right in the middle of it all, sharp, talented, and watching as the lines blurred. How long before someone cracked? How long before someone admitted the truth? Patrick has cracked now. And that crack isn't just a small fracture, it's a floodgate. Because once you admit the set wasn't just professional, once you say there was flirting, there was intimacy, you invite every fan, every critic, every former castmate to question everything. Which scenes carried hidden meanings? Which on-screen sparks were actually off-screen flames? And who else knew? This isn't just gossip. It's a reframing of an entire cultural phenomenon. Suits isn't just a show we loved. It's a show that may have been powered by a very real undercurrent of personal entanglements. And Patrick's confession forces us to reconsider every lingering glance, every heated exchange, every moment that felt too real to be fake. Maybe it wasn't fake at all. But here's the kicker, the part that keeps us hooked. Patrick hasn't told the whole story. He's hinted, teased, opened the door, but he hasn't laid every card on the table. Why not? Is he protecting someone? Is he afraid of backlash? Or is he waiting for the perfect moment to finally drop the full bombshell? This uncertainty is what makes his words so powerful. Because as much as he's revealed, he's also concealed. And that tension, that push and pull between what's said and what's left unsaid, is exactly why we're all still listening, still leaning in, still desperate to know more. Now, think about the timing. Suits has had a major resurgence thanks to streaming platforms. A new generation of fans is binge-watching the show, discovering the characters, dissecting the chemistry. And into this revival, Patrick drops his confession. Coincidence? Or a calculated move? Was this about truth, or about seizing a moment? Whatever the reason, the impact is undeniable. The internet lit up. Articles, think pieces, debates. Fans digging through old interviews, old behind-the-scenes footage, trying to connect dots that were always hiding in plain sight. And the conclusion many came to? That Suits wasn't just a legal drama. It was a stage for very real emotional entanglements. But before we dive into the gritty details, before we examine every revelation Patrick has offered and every ripple it created, let's ask the most important question. How much do you really want to know? Because once you cross this line, once you accept that Suits was never just a show, you can't go back. Every rewatch will feel different. Every scene will carry new weight. And every smile, every touch, will leave you wondering what was acting and what was truth. Patrick J. Adams has finally lifted the curtain. And what we see is scandal, betrayal, and raw human drama that rivals anything Suits ever scripted. But as shocking as his words are, they're just the beginning. Because behind those words lies a deeper truth. A truth that could change how we see Meghan Markle, Patrick himself, and the entire Suits legacy forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the chemistry that lit up your TV screen in Suits wasn't just the work of talented actors hitting their marks, but something much more dangerous simmering just beneath the surface? What if every smirk, every loaded pause, every smoldering glance carried the weight of secrets whispered behind closed doors? That's exactly where Patrick J. Adams takes us when he lifts the curtain on those early days of filming. Let's step back to when Suits was just beginning. It was 2011. A fresh new legal drama was being launched, one that didn't have the built-in safety net of a massive franchise or best-selling book adaptation. It had to survive on the strength of its writing, and more importantly, on the irresistible charm of its cast. Enter Patrick J. Adams as Mike Ross, the underdog with the photographic memory, and Meghan Markle as Rachel Zane, the paralegal who quickly became the show's heart. Now, when the cameras first started rolling, there was already buzz about how perfectly these two played off one another. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Patrick would later hint that the atmosphere on set wasn't just professional, that there was an energy, a charge, a sense that someone very specific, wasn't just acting. Imagine it. The long hours. The cast huddled together in trailers, late-night rehearsals, endless retakes under hot lights. The exhaustion mixed with adrenaline. In that environment, boundaries blur. Professional distance shrinks. And when someone has the kind of magnetic charm Meghan Markle was known for, sparks aren't just likely, they're inevitable. Patrick admits it now, in his careful, measured way. She flirted. Not once, not twice, but often. He doesn't say it with malice, more with a kind of resigned honesty. And the thing that shocks us is how casual he makes it sound, as if it was part of the atmosphere, part of the rhythm of those days. But here's the key question. Was it harmless? Or was it deliberate? Think about it. A show like Suits thrives on chemistry. The closer the cast appears to be, the more authentic the show feels. Was this simply Meghan immersing herself in the role, using her natural warmth to connect with everyone? Or was it something more, something that crossed lines even back then? You've probably noticed how some shows feel stiff, forced. The characters say the right lines, but you never quite believe them. With Suits, it was different. Viewers didn't just watch, they felt it. They believed every interaction. Why? Because off-screen, the cast wasn't just co-workers. They were drawn into something more complicated, more entangled, than anyone realized at the time. Patrick wasn't the only one who noticed. You can feel it in the way the rest of the cast interacted, in the tiny looks exchanged when cameras weren't rolling. He wasn't shouting it from the rooftops back then, but years later, his words confirm what fans had always suspected. The authenticity of Suits came from something that was dangerously real. And let's not forget, Patrick J. Adams wasn't just another actor on the roster. He was front and center. He had to navigate not just his role, but the delicate web of relationships forming around him. Every glance Meghan threw his way, every playful line, every laugh that lingered a little too long. He noticed, and he knew what it meant for the dynamic of the entire production. Think about the risk here. Hollywood is a small world. A set is even smaller. Flirtations don't just disappear into thin air, they echo. They change the way people interact. They create tension, jealousy, even resentment. And when intimacy enters the picture, everything shifts. So ask yourself, how much of that electric pull between Mike Ross and Rachel Zane was written in the script, and how much was Megan's real-life charm bleeding through? Was Patrick acting in those moments, or was he just reacting to something happening off-camera as much as on? The fascinating part of Patrick's revelation is that it forces us to rewatch Suits differently. Suddenly, the line between fiction and reality blurs. The smirks feel loaded. The pauses feel longer. The fire in their eyes looks less like acting and more like something slipping through that shouldn't have been there. But here's where things get really intriguing. Patrick doesn't stop at saying Megan flirted. He goes further. He admits there was intimacy. And that word, intimacy, changes everything. Because intimacy isn't casual. It's not just a smile or a compliment. It's private. It's personal. It's something that carries consequences far beyond the moment. You can almost imagine the ripple effect on set. Whispers in the makeup chair. Side glances during lunch breaks. Crew members trading knowing looks. The more it happened, the harder it became to pretend everything was business as usual. And Patrick? He was right in the middle of it. Observing. Participating. Trying to balance honesty with discretion. Here's where I want to pull you in. If you were Patrick, if you saw the lines blurring, if you felt the tension, if you knew what was really happening behind the scenes, would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have said something? Would you have protected the image of the show, or risked everything by exposing the truth? Because remember, in Hollywood, silence isn't neutral. It's survival. The cost of speaking up can be career-ending. And maybe that's why it's taken Patrick so many years to finally let these words out. Maybe that's why he speaks with both honesty and caution. He knows the weight they carry. He knows the storm they'll unleash. But he's spoken now. And once those words are out, they can't be taken back. We can't unhear them. We can't unsee the show through this new lens. Every viewer, every fan, now has to grapple with the idea that Suits wasn't just a show. It was a stage for something unscripted, something real, something intimate. And the most shocking part? Patrick wasn't the only one to see it. He wasn't the only one to feel it. Other cast members were there. Other crew members noticed. And if Patrick is willing to speak, how long before someone else does? How long before the rest of the puzzle starts to fall into place? Because the story doesn't stop here. This was just the beginning. What came next would push the Suits family to its breaking point. Loyalties were tested. Reputations were put on the line. And one incident, one unforgettable moment, would shatter the fragile harmony of the set forever. And when you hear what it was, you'll never look at Suits the same way again. What if I told you that what began as playful charm quickly snowballed into something much bigger? Something that would ripple through the entire cast of Suits like a silent storm. That's exactly what Chapter 2 reveals. Because while the cameras showed a polished, witty drama about law and deception, behind the scenes a different kind of drama was quietly unfolding, and Patrick J. Adams was right in the middle of it. Picture this. Patrick, a relatively unknown actor at the time, suddenly thrust into the spotlight as Mike Ross. The role wasn't just a job, it was his breakout moment. His face was on posters, his character's journey was the heart of the series, and his chemistry with Meghan Markle was the spark that kept audiences glued to their screens. That kind of sudden rise doesn't just change your career, it changes your relationships. It changes how people treat you, and it changes how you see the people around you. Now, imagine Meghan Markle at that very same moment. Beautiful, ambitious, and charismatic. She wasn't yet the household name she would become, but she was already someone who could command a room without saying a word. She knew how to connect, how to pull people in, how to make them feel special. On set, that kind of energy is intoxicating. At first, it seemed harmless. A laugh here, a compliment there. But as Patrick would later hint, it wasn't just one-on-one. Meghan didn't limit her warmth to him. She spread it across the cast, across the crew. It became a pattern. Some might call it friendliness. Others, manipulation. But to those who were there, it was clear, Meghan had an ability to blur lines. And that's where the tension began. Because when someone has that much charm, people notice. They wonder, They speculate. And on a set as close-knit as Suits, speculation spreads like wildfire. Suddenly, every look, every joke, every behind-the-scenes moment took on a new meaning. Was it real? Was it just acting? Or was it something in between? Patrick, caught in the eye of this storm, started to feel the weight of it. He wasn't just Megan's co-star. He was her primary on-screen partner. Their relationship was the beating heart of the show. That meant every moment of blurred boundaries reflected on him, too. If Megan flirted with others, it wasn't just a private act. It was something that could spill into their scenes, something that could change the energy between them. And that's exactly what happened. Patrick admits now that there were moments when he wondered, was the connection he felt with Megan truly unique? Or was she giving that same spark to others when the cameras weren't rolling? That doubt didn't just affect his personal feelings, it threatened to affect his performance. Let's pause here. Have you ever been in a situation where someone made you feel like you were the only one, only to discover they treated everyone the same way? Imagine the gut punch. Imagine the confusion. That's the world Patrick was navigating while trying to hold together one of the most important roles of his life. And here's where it gets even more complicated. The producers and writers of Suits thrived on the authentic chemistry between Mike and Rachel. They wanted sparks. They wanted heat. They wanted that natural tension to fuel the storyline. So if the actors' personal dynamics were bleeding into the work, was it really a problem, or was it a hidden asset? Was Megan's behavior actually helping the show? That's the contradiction that still haunts this story. Because what might have been inappropriate off-camera was pure gold on camera. Fans adored it. Ratings climbed. And the network leaned in. Nobody wanted to rock the boat. Nobody wanted to question what was happening, so long as the show kept delivering. But Patrick wasn't blind. He could feel the shift. He could sense the whispers. And he knew that the situation couldn't stay contained forever. Because eventually, someone was going to cross a line. And when that line was crossed, the delicate balance holding the cast together would collapse. Now, think about the stakes here. Megan wasn't just another actress. She was on the brink of something bigger, even if no one knew it at the time. Patrick wasn't just another actor either. He was carrying the weight of the series on his shoulders. If rumors started swirling, if intimacy started becoming more than whispers, it could destroy not just their reputations, but the entire show. So, Patrick made a choice. He kept quiet. He smiled through interviews. He delivered his lines. He let the world believe the story was exactly what the writers had scripted. But inside, he carried the knowledge that there was more. Much more. And here's the twist. The part that fans never knew until Patrick hinted at it years later. The flirtation wasn't just background noise. It built up. It escalated. It reached a point where it could no longer be brushed off as harmless charm. Something happened. Something that forced the cast, the crew, and Patrick himself to reckon with a truth they could no longer ignore. Because one day, it crossed a line no one expected. And from that moment on, Suits would never be the same. What if I told you that the whispers didn't just linger in the shadows? They grew louder, sharper, until they became impossible to ignore? That's where Chapter 3 begins. Because by this point, Patrick J. Adams wasn't just hinting about charm or friendly banter. He was pulling back the curtain on specific incidents, moments where Meghan Markle's behavior went beyond casual warmth and turned into something that left the entire set buzzing. Let's set the stage. Imagine the Suits set on a typical day. Bright lights. Suits pressed to perfection. Cameras positioned. Scripts in hand. But when the director called cut, the tension didn't vanish. If anything, that's when it was at its most obvious. Meghan wasn't shy about her charm. And Patrick, in his own words, makes it clear she had a way of turning even the most ordinary moment into something charged. There were times, Patrick recalls this, that Meghan would lean in just a little closer than necessary. That a compliment would come with a smile that lingered. That rehearsals between lines of dialogue felt less like work and more like something private unfolding in public. And here's the kicker. She didn't limit this to Patrick. She spread that same energy across the room. Other cast members, crew members, anyone who found themselves in her orbit. Now, stop and think about what that does to a working environment. You're in the middle of a grueling shoot. Hours of repeating the same scenes. Everyone is tired. Everyone is drained. And then, in walks Meghan with her effortless magnetism, sprinkling attention around like confetti. It lifted the mood. It made people laugh. But it also made people talk. Because you can't flirt with everyone, as Patrick would later describe, without someone eventually noticing the pattern. Fans often talk about how Megan's character, Rachel Zane, seemed to command every scene she was in, even when she wasn't the focus. But imagine how much more powerful that seemed when the off-camera Megan carried the same energy. Patrick wasn't just playing opposite a paralegal in love with Mike Ross. He was reacting to a woman who blurred the lines between performance and reality. And that's where the contradiction comes in. Because while the audience adored it, the cast was split. Some were amused. Some shrugged it off. But others, Patrick suggests, were unsettled. This wasn't just friendliness. This was intimacy creeping into spaces it didn't belong. And once that line was crossed, no one could look at the situation the same way again. Let's not sugarcoat it. Patrick uses the word intimate. That doesn't mean casual. That doesn't mean playful. That means there were moments, real, undeniable moments, that couldn't be written off as acting. And that's what he's finally admitting now. That the spark wasn't just a spark. It was a flame that burned quietly behind the scenes, while the rest of the world thought they were only watching fiction. Have you ever been in a room where you felt something unspoken, something charged, passing between two people? You can't always prove it, but you can feel it. That was the atmosphere on set. The longer it went on, the heavier it became. And the crew, those silent witnesses to everything, carried the knowledge too. You can almost picture them, exchanging glances, whispering between takes, wondering how far this was really going to go. Patrick's position in all of this was uniquely complicated. He was the one working closest with Megan. He was the one who shared the bulk of the intimate scenes, which meant that, whether he wanted it or not, he was part of the story. Fans saw their chemistry as the core of Suits, but Patrick knew that what people were watching wasn't just scripted, it was fueled by something else. And here's where Patrick's words become most telling. He doesn't just say Megan flirted. He doesn't just say there was intimacy. He says it in a way that suggests inevitability, as if it wasn't a one-off moment, but a pattern that was woven into the fabric of those years on set. A pattern that cast a shadow over everything else. Now, here's the emotional beat, betrayal. Not in the traditional sense, but in the sense of trust being tested. Casts are supposed to be families. Sets are supposed to be safe. Everyone is supposed to know where the boundaries are. But when those boundaries blur, when trust is bent, people start to wonder who they can really depend on. And Patrick, in his carefully chosen words, makes it clear, those days were anything but simple. So ask yourself this. How many of the moments you loved on Suits, the fiery exchanges, the passionate glances, were real? How many were Patrick and Megan slipping into character? And how many were Patrick and Megan slipping into something else entirely? That's the question Patrick forces us to wrestle with. And it's a question with no easy answer. But here's the cliffhanger. Because as much as Patrick admits, he also leaves things unsaid. He drops hints. He paints the picture. But he doesn't reveal every detail. And that silence, that deliberate gap, screams louder than words. Because if the flirting became intimacy, and if intimacy became something bigger, then the natural next question is, what did the rest of the cast do when they realized? And that's where we go next. Because the whispers didn't stay whispers. They turned into murmurs. And the murmurs turned into rumors that spread across the entire set, forcing everyone, actors, crew, even producers, to decide whether they would stay silent or speak up. But when whispers started spreading, the crew had to make a choice, stay silent or speak up. What if I told you that the most revealing part of this story isn't what Patrick J. Adams experienced directly, but what he later chose to say, years after the fact, when no one expected him to? That's where Chapter 4 begins. Because when Patrick finally broke his silence in interviews, it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a calculated choice, and every word carried the weight of years of buried tension from the Suits set. Picture Patrick in an interview chair, calm, polished, smiling the way actors do when they've been asked the same questions 100 times. What was it like working on Suits? How did you feel about Meghan Markle's rise to royalty? Was the chemistry between you two as strong off-screen as it looked on-screen? Most actors stick to the script. They give polite answers. They keep the nostalgia lighthearted and the stories vague. But Patrick didn't do that, not entirely. He let cracks show. He leaned into honesty. And for the first time, he admitted what fans had always speculated but never confirmed, that Meghan wasn't just charming on camera. She was charming off camera too. Too charming. Now here's the fascinating part. Patrick's tone mattered just as much as his words. He didn't sound bitter. He didn't sound gossipy. If anything, he sounded weary, like someone finally tired of carrying a secret around. And that made his confession even more powerful. Because if he had said it with malice, we might have dismissed it. But weary honesty? That hits differently. In one conversation, his body language told the story. Leaning back, pausing before answering, smiling a little too long before admitting. She flirted with everyone. Think about that for a moment. He could have dodged. He could have laughed it off. But instead, he leaned into the truth and left the rest hanging in the air. And it wasn't just the flirting. He dared to use the word intimate. That single word turned a casual remark into a headline. Because intimacy doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen without consequence. And by saying it, Patrick confirmed what insiders had whispered for years, that the chemistry between Meghan and her co-stars wasn't just acting. Now let's pause here. Why would Patrick say this now? Why, years after the show wrapped, would he finally speak up? The answer might be simpler than we think. Timing. Meghan Markle isn't just an actress anymore. She's a global figure, part of one of the most talked about families in the world. Anything said about her now carries more weight than it ever would have when she was just Rachel Zane on Suits. Patrick knows this. He knows that by choosing this moment, his words will reverberate far louder than they ever could have before. And reverberate they did. The media pounced. Headlines exploded. Fans rewatched episodes, dissecting every lingering glance, every unscripted smile. It wasn't just nostalgia anymore. It was investigation. What was real? What was fiction? And who else knew the truth all along? But here's where the emotional complexity kicks in. Patrick wasn't just exposing Meghan. He was exposing himself. By admitting this, he put his own role under the microscope. Was he complicit? Was he a participant? Or was he just an observer, caught in a situation he couldn't control? He doesn't give us the full answer. And maybe that's deliberate. Maybe he knows that leaving some things unsaid keeps the intrigue alive. Audience, let me ask you this. If you were in Patrick's shoes, would you have spoken? Would you have risked the backlash, the criticism, the accusations of bitterness, just to get the truth out? Or would you have kept quiet, preserving the polished image of a show that millions still adore? Because let's not forget, Patrick's revelation doesn't just reframe Meghan. It reframes the entire cast. If one actor admits it, what about the others? Did Gabriel Mock notice? Did Sarah Rafferty? Did Gina Torres? Of course they did. Sets are small worlds. Secrets don't stay secret for long. And by saying what he said, Patrick cracked open a door that others might one day walk through too. Now, let's touch on the irony. Meghan Markle has spent years curating her public image as polished, professional, principled. A woman who overcame Hollywood's harsh realities to step into a global spotlight. But Patrick's words peel back that image. They remind us that beneath every carefully crafted public persona, there's a private truth. And sometimes that truth is messy, flawed, and human. And here's the kicker, the part no one expected. When Meghan got wind of Patrick's words, her reaction shocked everyone. You'd think she might dismiss it, laugh it off, call it an exaggeration. But according to insiders, her response was far from casual. It wasn't indifference. It was anger. Meghan, who so often projects calm and control, was reportedly furious that someone she once worked so closely with would dare to break the unspoken code of silence. And that anger raises even more questions. Why such a strong reaction if there was nothing to hide? Why so defensive if it was just harmless charm? Could it be that Patrick hit a nerve? Could it be that his words threatened to unravel a carefully protected narrative Meghan has fought to maintain? That's the cliffhanger Patrick leaves us with. His honesty didn't just spark curiosity, it sparked confrontation. And when Meghan's reaction collided with Patrick's confession, it created a storm that made even the old suit storylines look tame in comparison. But what did Meghan do next? How far was she willing to go to silence the whispers, to protect her image, and to keep the past from colliding with her present? That's the part no one saw coming. What if I told you that Meghan Markle's most powerful tool on the set of Suits wasn't her acting, her wardrobe, or even her ambition, but her ability to charm, disarm, and ultimately control a room? That's where Chapter 5 begins. Because as Patrick J. Adams painted the picture, it wasn't simply that Meghan flirted, it was how she used it. strategically, like a weapon. And once you see it that way, the entire narrative of the show takes on a darker, more calculated edge. Imagine walking into a room with Megan. You're tired. You've been rehearsing lines for hours. The fluorescent lights overhead are buzzing. The director's losing patience. And then she walks in. Suddenly, the energy shifts. She laughs, makes eye contact, leans in at just the right moment. You feel seen, important, special. And then, before you realize it, she's doing the exact same thing with the next person. And the next. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Patrick himself compared it to chess. Every move calculated. Every smile timed. Every innocent touch of the arm designed to create a ripple. That's not just charm. That's strategy. And strategy, in the high-pressure environment of a television set, is dangerous. Because here's the thing. Actors feed off energy. Chemistry is currency. If one person can manipulate that energy, they can manipulate the entire set. And that's exactly what Megan was doing. She wasn't just connecting with people. She was controlling them, drawing them in, keeping them hooked, making them feel like they mattered more than they actually did. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Was this manipulation malicious? Or was it survival? Hollywood is brutal. Roles are fleeting. Opportunities vanish overnight. For a woman trying to climb the ranks, perhaps Megan was simply playing the game better than anyone else. After all, isn't Hollywood built on illusion? Isn't every interaction, every performance, every handshake a negotiation of power? Let me ask you directly. Do you think Megan's behavior was a reflection of her ambition or her personality? Was it part of the role she had to play to survive? Or was it who she truly was, behind the cameras, stripped of the scripts and stage lights? Patrick's hints make us wonder. He doesn't outright condemn her. He doesn't call her manipulative in so many words. Instead, he lets the anecdotes do the work. He describes the moments. The laughter that felt too sharp. The glances that lingered too long. The way she could shift from one person to another without missing a beat. And in those details, the picture forms itself. The irony is that it worked. Fans adored Rachel Zane. She was brilliant, charming, aspirational. The producers leaned into her role because viewers couldn't get enough. The writers built stories around her because she carried weight. On-screen success came directly from off-screen behavior. The more Megan blurred the lines, the stronger her character became. But this created a ripple effect among the cast. Some embraced it. Some shrugged. But others? Others grew wary. Because when someone is that good at charm, you start to question everything. Was that compliment real? Was that hug genuine? Or was it just another move in the game? And Patrick, at the center of it all, couldn't escape those questions. Now here's where the tension spikes. Patrick admits there was intimacy. And intimacy doesn't just happen by accident. It's the inevitable result of blurred lines and unchecked boundaries. Once that intimacy began, even in small moments, the balance on set shifted forever. Because intimacy isn't neutral. It's not something you can keep contained. It spills. It affects friendships. It breeds rumors. It creates cracks in trust that can never fully be repaired. And those cracks started to show. Patrick recalls how crew members began whispering, how other actors exchanged side glances, how certain scenes felt heavier than they should have. Imagine being on that set, feeling the atmosphere thicken, knowing that something was happening off-camera that could blow everything apart at any moment. The contradictions are almost poetic. Megan, the paralegal on-screen fighting for respect and boundaries, blurring boundaries off-screen. A show built on secrets and deception, fueled by real-life secrets and unspoken truths behind the cameras. Life imitating art, or art imitating life. That's the irony Patrick leaves us to wrestle with. And here's the emotional beat, betrayal. Not in a single, explosive moment, but in the slow realization that what seemed like harmless charm was actually something more dangerous. That the warmth everyone felt wasn't necessarily personal, it was strategic. And Patrick, looking back, makes it clear, this wasn't just about acting. This was about control. But here's the cliffhanger, the part that keeps you hooked. Because Patrick doesn't just stop at describing Megan's strategy. He teases one moment, one unforgettable incident, that proved it was far more than innocent. A moment that crossed a line and changed how everyone saw Megan from that day forward. And when you hear what that moment was, you'll realize just how fragile the harmony of the suit set really was. But there was one moment on set that proved it was far more than innocent. What if I told you that the line between playful charm and dangerous intimacy wasn't just blurred on the set of Suits? It was crossed, right in front of the very people who thought they were safe from the fallout? That's where Chapter 6 begins. Because Patrick J. Adams didn't just hint at chemistry. He didn't just suggest flirtation. He admitted there was a moment, a single, undeniable moment, that proved the atmosphere on set wasn't harmless at all. Close your eyes and picture this. The set is buzzing. The crew is moving equipment into place. Lights are being adjusted. The cast is rehearsing their lines. It's routine, just another day in the long grind of television production. But then, something happens. Something so charged, so intimate, that the routine shatters. The crew stops pretending not to notice. The whispers, the glances, the subtle tension, suddenly, they all have something solid to attach themselves to. Patrick would later describe it with restraint. He didn't spill every detail. He didn't paint it with sensational strokes. But he said enough. Enough to confirm that Meghan Markle crossed a line with intimacy that could no longer be brushed off as charm. Enough to confirm that those whispers weren't just speculation. They were rooted in truth. Now, what exactly was that moment? Patrick doesn't spell it out word for word, but he uses the word intimate. And in Hollywood, that's a loaded word. It wasn't a playful hand on the arm. It wasn't a laugh that lingered too long. It was physical. It was real. It was personal. And it was undeniable. Think about how that must have felt for the people around them. For cast members who thought their working relationships were safe. For crew members who had spent years in the business but still felt uncomfortable when they saw something they weren't supposed to see. The air on set must have shifted instantly. Thick, heavy, unspoken. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one dared say it out loud. And here's the irony. Suits was built on secrets, hidden agendas. People pretending to be someone they weren't. The entire show thrived on lies wrapped in charm. And right there, behind the cameras, the cast was living out the exact same narrative. The actors weren't just playing characters with blurred lines. They were blurring the lines themselves. Patrick, caught in the center of it all, carried the weight. He couldn't deny it anymore. He couldn't dismiss it as friendliness or charisma. Intimacy changes everything. It rewrites relationships. It transforms trust. And it puts reputations on the line. Here's the emotional sting: guilt. Patrick's words years later don't sound triumphant. They don't sound vengeful. They sound heavy, burdened. Like someone who'd been carrying a truth for too long. Someone who knew the damage it caused, but couldn't quite bring himself to reveal every detail. That guilt hangs in the air, and you can feel it when he speaks. Let me ask you this, if you were there. If you saw the moment that intimacy crossed into something undeniable, would you have stayed silent? Would you have protected the actors you admired, the show you loved, the careers on the line? Or would you have spoken, risking everything to tell the truth? Because here's the reality. Silence protects reputations. But silence also protects the guilty. And on the Suits set, silence became the unspoken rule. Everyone knew. No one said a word. Until now. This moment, this act of intimacy, wasn't just a ripple. It was a crack. A crack in the carefully constructed image of the cast as a family. A crack in the trust that held them together. And once a crack appears, it only widens. Rumors spread. Loyalties shift. People take sides. Patrick's honesty forces us to confront a question we'd rather avoid. How much of the show we adored was fueled by real-life entanglements? Were we watching fiction? Or were we watching a cast so tangled in their own private dramas that they couldn't separate performance from reality? And the most unsettling thought? Maybe that's why it worked so well. Maybe Suits became a cultural phenomenon not because of clever writing alone, but because the cast was living out their own unscripted drama in every scene. And we, the audience, felt it. We just didn't know why. But here's the cliffhanger, the part that leaves you restless, searching for answers. That moment of intimacy didn't just end when the cameras rolled again. It lingered. It spread. And before long, it wasn't just Patrick who felt the weight. Other cast members noticed. Other crew members talked. And suddenly, the harmony that had held Suits together for years was on the verge of collapse. And that's when the fragile balance shattered, leaving behind a set where trust was broken, whispers became louder, and no one could look at Meghan Markle or Patrick J. Adams the same way again. And that's where the Real story begins. What if I told you that once that line of intimacy was crossed, the Suits set was never the same again? That's where Chapter 7 begins. Because the fallout didn't just stay between Patrick J. Adams and Meghan Markle. It spread like wildfire through the cast and crew. The ripple effect was unavoidable, and suddenly, the set wasn't just a workplace. It was a battlefield of unspoken tension, whispered suspicions, and fractured loyalties. Imagine this. You walk into the makeup trailer. Normally, it's a place of laughter, banter, small talk before the long day begins. But now the energy is different. Eyes dart. Conversations stop when certain people enter. The warmth feels forced. Because everyone knows something happened. They just don't know how much. Or with whom. That's what Patrick described years later. That shift. That moment when the set stopped being a family and started being divided by secrets. For him, it was more than uncomfortable. It was a constant weight. Every time he looked at Meghan, every time he stepped into a scene, he had to juggle the professional image they projected and the private reality everyone was whispering about. And here's where the tension grows sharper. Whispers never stay whispers. Crew members, who see everything but rarely speak, began sharing their observations. Fellow actors started asking quiet questions, testing the waters, trying to gauge how much truth there really was to the rumors. Suddenly, the set wasn't just about scripts and storylines. It was about managing a scandal that no one dared address directly. Patrick found himself in a particularly brutal position. He wasn't just Meghan's scene partner. He was her closest confidant on the show, which meant that whether he liked it or not, he was implicated in every whisper, every rumor, every suspicion. Even if he wasn't directly involved in every moment, he carried the burden of proximity. If Meghan was at the center of the whispers, then Patrick was standing right beside her. Let me ask you, how would you handle that? If you were Patrick, would you distance yourself to protect your reputation? Or would you stay loyal, silent, hoping the rumors would die down? Because here's the truth. On a set like Suits, silence can be mistaken for guilt. And Patrick, caught in the middle, couldn't escape the scrutiny. The effect on the cast dynamic was undeniable. Some pulled closer to Meghan, defending her, laughing off the rumors as exaggerated nonsense. Others grew colder, more distant, careful not to get caught in the crossfire. The once easy camaraderie began to fracture. And for a show that thrived on the illusion of a tight-knit family, that fracture was dangerous. But here's the cruel twist. The producers and executives? They didn't want to touch it. As long as the chemistry on screen was electric, as long as the ratings climbed, they turned a blind eye. Drama off-screen was tolerated, even encouraged, if it fueled drama on-screen. In that sense, the rumors weren't a liability. They were an asset. That's the irony Patrick forces us to face. What was toxic behind the scenes may have been the very thing that made Suits so addictive to watch. The tension wasn't just written, it was real. And the more the cast wrestled with those blurred boundaries, the more authentic their performances became. But for Patrick, it was suffocating. He admits that every day on set became a balancing act. Professionalism on the surface, turmoil underneath. He had to carry the weight of knowing what others suspected but never said aloud. And when you're forced to live in that kind of dual reality, pretending everything is fine while knowing the truth is anything but, it eats away at you. Here's the emotional beat: isolation. Patrick, the show's anchor, the character fans rooted for, was privately carrying a storm that no one could see. He was both participant and prisoner, caught in a web of charm, intimacy, and silence that made every day a test of endurance. And yet, he didn't speak out. Not then. He smiled for interviews. He posed for photos. He played his role, both on screen and off. Because what choice did he really have? Speaking out could have destroyed not only Meghan's reputation, but his own career. And so he stayed quiet, swallowing the tension, waiting for the inevitable moment when it would all come crashing down. And that moment came. Because as Patrick hints, the intimacy wasn't a one-off. It didn't stay contained. It began to spill into other relationships, other interactions, other corners of the set. Suddenly, Megan wasn't just Patrick's burden, she was everyone's. And that created an impossible choice for the cast and crew alike. Would they continue to stay silent, protecting the illusion of harmony? Or would someone finally break ranks and say the truth out loud? Because Patrick wasn't the only one ready to talk. What if I told you that Patrick J. Adams wasn't the only one who saw it? That other voices, subtle but unmistakable, have been hinting for years that something behind the scenes of Suits was far messier than the polished product we saw on screen. That's where Chapter 8 begins. Because once whispers turn into rumors, the next stage is always confirmation. And in this case, confirmation came not from Patrick alone, but from the quiet, careful comments of other cast members who couldn't quite keep the truth hidden forever. Think about this. In Hollywood, silence is currency. Everyone knows things. Everyone sees things. But only a few ever speak. Yet if you watch closely, if you dig through interviews, press junkets, panel discussions, you'll notice moments, tiny slips, awkward laughs, knowing glances, where the cast of Suits betrayed more than they intended. For example, there were times when Megan was mentioned and Patrick or Gabriel mocked. Harvey Specter would exchange a look, a smirk, a pause that didn't quite fit the moment. These weren't coincidences. These were tells, signs that the polished narrative wasn't the whole story. And then there's Sarah Rafferty, beloved by fans as Donna, known for her poise, her grace, her unwavering support of the cast. But listen closely to how she speaks about the early days of Suits. There's warmth, yes, but also caution. She praises the chemistry, but she does so with words that feel carefully chosen, as if she's tiptoeing around something unspoken, as if she knows the line between what the fans saw and what really happened behind the curtain. Now let's talk about re-examining footage. Fans, once Patrick's words resurfaced, began combing through old interviews, behind-the-scenes reels, blooper clips. And what they found is telling. Megan leaning too close. Patrick's half-smile, half-grimace in moments that weren't scripted. Gabriel joking in ways that seemed loaded, almost like an inside joke the audience wasn't privy to. These weren't just random quirks, they were breadcrumbs. And suddenly, with Patrick's confession, those breadcrumbs form a trail. Here's the irony. The fans had always felt something. Even during the show's original run, people questioned how the chemistry between Mike and Rachel felt so authentic. Was it acting, or was there something else driving it? At the time, the answer was brushed off. They're just good actors. But now, knowing what Patrick admitted, the answer feels different. Maybe too different. Let me ask you this. When you rewatch Suits, can you honestly say every look, every pause, every charged silence was just scripted? Or does it feel, now, like we were all watching something unscripted slip through? Patrick's honesty has unlocked a new way of seeing. Suddenly, every moment is suspect. Every laugh in a blooper reel is reinterpreted. Every behind-the-scenes panel feels like an exercise in coded language. And the more fans dig, the more they see what was hiding in plain sight. But it isn't just the fans. Other cast members have dropped subtle acknowledgments too. Gina Torres, for instance, once mentioned the intensity of working on Suits. At the time, it sounded like she was referring to the grueling production schedule. But now, with hindsight, that word, intensity, carries more weight. What kind of intensity was she really referring to? The long hours? Or the emotional storms brewing off camera? The contradictions here are fascinating. Megan, who presented herself as controlled, disciplined, polished, was apparently also at the center of chaos. The woman who played a character striving for respect and boundaries was simultaneously shattering boundaries in real life. And her co-stars, caught in that contradiction, couldn't help but leave traces of it in their words, their expressions, their silence. And then came the story Patrick hinted at but never fully told, the one Megan never wanted the world to hear. A moment when her off-screen intimacy went too far. A moment that forced not just Patrick, but the entire cast to acknowledge that this wasn't harmless anymore. It wasn't professional. It wasn't sustainable. Here's the emotional spike: betrayal. The realization among the cast that they weren't just colleagues anymore. They were participants in an unspoken drama, one that Megan seemed to be scripting as much as the writers. That betrayal left scars. It fractured trust. It created a divide that could never fully be healed. And here's the cliffhanger. If Patrick was brave enough to admit what he saw, and if other cast members were already dropping hints without naming names, then the question isn't if more will speak, it's when. Because once one person breaks the silence, silence becomes impossible to maintain. And when the next voice speaks up, it won't just confirm Patrick's story. It could reveal details that even he didn't dare to share. And then, a story surfaced that Megan never wanted the world to hear. What if I told you that silence on the Suits set came at a price? That while the cameras captured polished performances, the real cost of keeping quiet was eating away at the cast and crew from the inside out. That's where Chapter 9 begins. Because once whispers hardened into rumors, the question shifted from what happened to how long could they keep it hidden? Picture this. The set, once buzzing with camaraderie, had started to feel heavy. Makeup artists kept their heads down. Crew members avoided eye contact. Actors moved through their scenes with a tension that couldn't be written into the script. The illusion of a tight-knit family was cracking. Why? Because secrets, once known, don't disappear. They fester. Patrick J. Adams has since admitted the truth. There was intimacy. Not just a flirtatious smile or lingering touch, but intimacy that crossed the line. And when something like that happens in a professional setting, it doesn't stay private for long. People talk. People speculate. And on a show as high-profile as Suits, people knew the stakes were astronomical. But here's the irony. The very thing that should have torn the show apart, the rumors, the discomfort, the betrayal, became the thing that fueled it. The chemistry on screen only grew more believable. The fire between characters felt more authentic. And audiences couldn't get enough. The cost of silence was high, but for producers and networks, it was worth it. Ratings climbed. Fans obsessed. And the actors were trapped in a reality they couldn't escape. Now let's pause. Imagine being Patrick. You've got the lead role, your career is on the rise, and the success of the show depends on your chemistry with Meghan Markle. But you know the truth. That chemistry isn't just acting. It's rooted in something real, something messy, something the world isn't supposed to see. How do you carry that weight? How do you deliver line after line, scene after scene, knowing the truth is sitting right across from you? That's the emotional spike here, the burden of silence. Patrick didn't just keep the secret, he lived it. Every day on set was a balancing act between professional duty and private discomfort. And it wasn't just him. The entire cast bore the weight of what they knew but couldn't say. Here's the contradiction. Meghan's public image was spotless. To the outside world, she was ambitious, disciplined, the picture of professionalism. But inside the world of Suits, she was the center of tension, the one whose charm had tipped into chaos. That duality created a kind of cognitive dissonance, what people saw versus what people knew. And living in that contradiction was exhausting. But the story doesn't end there. Because as the seasons went on, and as Meghan's off-screen life grew more high-profile, the cost of silence only grew heavier. When she began dating Prince Harry, the rumors from Suits suddenly carried more weight. Secrets that had once belonged to a television set now had global implications. The cast knew it. The crew knew it. And Patrick, most of all, knew it. Let me ask you, if you had been in their shoes, would you have spoken then? Would you have risked derailing not just a hit show, but Meghan's entire trajectory toward royalty? Or would you have stayed quiet, convincing yourself that silence was the lesser evil? Because that's exactly what happened. The silence wasn't just about protecting reputations. It was about protecting futures. Meghan's, Patrick's, the show's, everyone's. And for years, that silence held. Until now. Here's the emotional beat, regret. Patrick's later words aren't triumphant. They're tinged with the sadness of someone who knows that keeping quiet cost him something. His authenticity, his peace of mind, maybe even friendships that could never be repaired. The cost of silence was steep, and he paid it. But here's the cliffhanger. Just as Meghan's career took its most dramatic turn, leaving Suits to become engaged to Prince Harry, the whispers from the set didn't vanish. They grew louder. Because once she stepped into the global spotlight, the stakes changed. The secrets weren't just about a TV show anymore. They were about a woman preparing to enter the British monarchy. And that meant the cost of silence was about to explode. And when Meghan's life took a royal turn, those secrets became even more dangerous. What if I told you that Meghan Markle's departure from Suits wasn't just a storyline decision, but a seismic event that rippled through the entire cast and forced Patrick J. Adams to wrestle with truths he had buried for years? That's where Chapter 10 begins. Because Meghan leaving the show to become engaged to Prince Harry wasn't just a career move. It was an escape. And for Patrick, it meant confronting the reality of everything that had happened on set, while the world was suddenly watching. Picture the atmosphere in those final seasons. Everyone knew Meghan's exit was coming. The storylines were shifting, the writers weaving in her departure, the producers preparing to lose one of their biggest stars. On screen, Rachel Zane was about to walk off into the sunset with Mike Ross. But off-screen, the set was buzzing with something far more electric, far more volatile. By then, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. The rumors about Meghan's flirtations, her intimacy, the blurred lines behind the scenes, they were common knowledge among the cast and crew. They had learned to work around it, to bury it under professionalism. But now, as Meghan prepared to leave, the question wasn't just how would the show survive? It was what would happen if the truth ever got out. Patrick's reflections during this time are telling. He has since admitted that he felt conflicted. On one hand, he was happy for Meghan. Happy that she had found love, happy that she was stepping into a life bigger than Hollywood. But on the other hand, he carried the weight of their shared history, the intimacy that had never been spoken of openly, the rumors that still clung to her name. And as she stepped onto the global stage, those unspoken truths became harder for him to ignore. Here's the contradiction. The world was celebrating Meghan's fairy tale. The glamorous actress marrying into royalty, breaking boundaries, rewriting history. But for those who had been on set, who had seen the other side, the narrative wasn't so simple. They knew things the world didn't. They had lived through moments that didn't fit the fairy tale. And that created a kind of cognitive dissonance that Patrick couldn't shake. Imagine being him in those days. Watching Meghan ascend into the most scrutinized family in the world, while knowing that the Meghan he had known was far more complicated, far more human, far more flawed. Imagine sitting in interviews, being asked about her, and having to smile, nod, play along, while inside you carried the knowledge of what really happened. Let me ask you, could you do it? Could you watch someone you knew intimately step into a global spotlight, knowing that the world's perception of them was built on only half the truth? Would you stay silent, or would you break the silence, risking everything? Patrick chose silence, for a time. He attended Meghan's royal wedding. He smiled for the cameras. He played his part in the narrative, just as he had played Mike Ross for years. But silence doesn't erase truth. And for Patrick, it gnawed away. And here's the emotional spike: loyalty versus honesty. Patrick had been loyal to Meghan for years, protecting her image, shielding her from the consequences of what had happened on set. But as she moved into royalty, that loyalty became harder to reconcile with honesty. He knew the truth. He knew the rumors weren't baseless. And the burden of carrying that truth while the world celebrated Meghan's perfection was unbearable. The irony is heartbreaking. On screen, Mike and Rachel's love story ended in marriage, a happy ending written for millions of fans. Off-screen, Meghan was walking into her own marriage, one that seemed to mirror the scripted fairy tale. But for Patrick, that parallel wasn't sweet, it was haunting, because he knew the reality behind the illusion. And here's the cliffhanger. Patrick's reflections don't end with Meghan's departure. They begin there. Because what he realized in those final days of Suits wasn't just that the show was losing a star, it was that he was losing the ability to keep silent forever. The weight was too heavy, the truth too explosive. And as Meghan embraced her new life, Patrick knew that one day, he would have to tell the world what really happened. But the story didn't end with her leaving the show, it was just the beginning. What if I told you that Meghan Markle's exit from Suits didn't close the book on the rumors? It lit the fuse for Patrick J. Adams to finally start speaking more openly than ever before. That's where Chapter 11 begins. Because after Meghan walked away from the show and into Buckingham Palace, Patrick no longer had to balance daily scenes, rehearsals, or shared interviews with her. The distance gave him freedom. And with that freedom came boldness. Picture Patrick after Meghan's royal wedding. No longer tied to a co-star who had become untouchable, no longer confined by the unspoken rules of protecting a colleague's repu.